Hear me at the back okay? Yeah, good. Okay. Welcome to the CDO panel. I'm kind of master of ceremonies for this. My name is Ross Simpson. Run a business called the Insight Republic, and we help companies with their data problems. However, these are the people who've got the problems. So let me introduce them one by one. So we've got Ahmed on the end. Ahmed's the interim chief information officer at Camden. He's held senior technical roles in private and tertiary sectors. Although he is CIO and doesn't have the word data in his title, he assures me he is actually a CDO, not just a CIO masquerading. So, his passion is for finding ways for IT to positively disrupt traditional ways of working, and more importantly for him, developing the talent needed for the digital age. Next, Joanna. Joanna's head of data at the pensions regulator, where she's lining data into the central function within the transformation program whilst creating a BAU data function. An experienced data specialist with demonstrable history of working with data. HMRC as well, I believe. Yeah. So anything around government or talking around about structures and how hard it is to share data, try and see how hard it is in HMRC to share data across individual departments, never mind across divisions. Barry. Barry has the great honour of being not only a CDO once, but twice. So he was the CDO at HSBC, and he's currently the interim CDO at Bank of Ireland. So he's got the scars from doing both, I guess. And then finally, last but not least, Ryan. Ryan leads the Dyson's global data and analytics team. Prior to that, he spent 4.5 years at Google, so you don't get much more data literate people like that. And actually still knows how to program. Okay. So what we're going to do, the way we'd like to do this is, we've got some questions. I'll throw them at the team. Then they're going to share with you at the end what one of their key secrets, key tips is, and then it's over to you to fire questions as long as you want, but remember this is the last session of the day, so we'll try and keep it to time as much as possible. So, Ahmed, let's start with you. Strategy and London. Tell us more about what the Mayor's trying to do.
Thank you. If you'll indulge me for a minute, I'll talk about Camden and then I'll talk about how that fits in with the London agenda. So when I talk about data at Camden, I talk about two domains, internal and external. So as a local authority and a borough serving a population of 250,000 people, there are some investments that we've made over the past sort of 3 to 5 years, build some building blocks of data capability. So things like our master data management infrastructure and investment, the way that we visualize data with dashboards. Open data is a key tenant, and actually we've got an organizational charter around open data. So it's quite interesting. Internally, we've got quite a lot of building blocks in place that we're now starting to see real value derived from it. So this time last year, I was talking about how we're looking at joining up complex people services with kind of place type services to help inform the way that we deliver social care, for example, to really complex and challenging environments. And so actually we're using tools like I've just described right now in Camden. We've got a Resilient Families program where actually we're starting to bring together data from multiple data sources to inform the social care that's delivered to vulnerable individuals in a way that actually we couldn't do before because things were siloed. So from an internal point of view, really exciting and actually lots of opportunity. But for me, to answer the question, I sit on the Smart London board, or the Mayor's Smart London board now, and there's an opportunity for London. There's actually an ambition from Sadiq for London to be the centre of data. And when I look around today, actually, you can really see that tangibly in the energy and enthusiasm and the brains and expertise that are in Olympia today. So the question is, well, what does the centre of data mean? And what is the role of local authorities, of which there are 30 somewhere between 32 and 34, depending on who you ask, for London to be the centre of data. So when I talked about internal data around Camden, we've got these kind of building blocks in place, and actually we're leading the agenda from a London perspective. When you look at the opportunity that is in Camden, for Camden to really support that London data agenda, there's almost a perfect storm of things going on at the moment. So right now, if you look at the organisations, the companies, the businesses in Camden, I can name organisations like Google and DeepMind and others, lots of tech/data companies investing in Camden as a borough. And we're at an interesting point in our journey where we are redoing our corporate plan for the next 5 years. So there's an opportunity for actually data to be a growth sector and a growth opportunity for Camden. So the question for me is, how can we attract the best businesses in the borough? With our investment in place in our community investment program, how can we incubate and provide the facilities and infrastructure to attract startups and small businesses in that space? How can we work with universities and the knowledge quarter and the knowledge sector to help provide the academic investment that we need to make London awesome at data? There's a really interesting activity at Camden around skills. So obviously all of you familiar with STEM and the kind of government push for STEM subjects. Camden's got an awesome creative arts sector. So the question we've asked ourselves is, how can we start to train and educate young people for jobs that don't even exist yet? And that's exactly the kind of bleeding edge of where data is. So there's an opportunity around skills as well as kind of infrastructure and investment. So for me, when I look at the kind of package, there is a really unique point in time right now for London and the boroughs, and Camden I see at the forefront of that, to enable us to be the centre of data in a way that perhaps no other country is able to meet. So that's it. That's my pitch, really.
Thank you. So it sounds like you've got a strategy. There's a lot of change going on.
Yeah.
At the pensions regulator, Joanna, you've got the job, I guess, of implementing a function within transformation and change. And it's how do you manage the message and communication about that?
Yeah, so the work that we do at the pension regulator, we're using data in certain areas of the business, but we're also in transformation. So we're developing a new target operating model for the business, which will be data-driven, like they want to be. So we're aligning data to that as well. At the same time, we're doing that low-hanging fruits exploitation projects to show people exactly the art of the possible to try and drive some of these changes. But also, we have no business as usual capability yet. The team is so new, so fresh. So on top of me trying to bring in the right skill, develop the right capability, create the right culture, we're also trying to manage our data successfully, pull data governance up, understand our data quality, do our master data management. Oh, and we need some technology as well. Surely we'll need to use things in a different way. So the question that gets asked to me a lot is, how are you going to do this? This is such an incredibly big change, and actually you're fundamental to everything that's happening in the business, which is really quite daunting. The way that I'm thinking about this now is that actually what the business is seeing when I'm communicating to them regularly is the jigsaw pieces. They're seeing the GDPR project, they're seeing the data cleansing project, they're seeing us involved in the target operating model where we have a new gateway being developed using data, and that's lovely. What they're not seeing underneath are the levers that I'm thinking of that all of these create. So we can often think about a lever being at the beginning of a process. So, oh, this is great, GDPR, so we can get some new tech and some new staff. Lever, great. But actually it goes throughout the process of that. So great, we bring the tech and the capability in, but what can we do with that software next? How can we implement it onto the business? Where can we get better value for that? So our process that we're going through at the moment looks at not just leveraging at the beginning, but leveraging throughout the process to help us on this journey, to make the transition smoother, to help the perception that actually it's not as big a change as you think. We're embedding things now that will implicate in the future and have greater impact as we go down the line.
Thank you. I think everybody's going through change, and whether it's a transformation, whether it's what's the role of a CDO, how many people do I need, what's machine learning. Barry, in terms of you who've sort of kind of been a CDO once now, twice, you've seen a lot of transformation. What would be your key tips around how do you communicate that message and really make things stick?
For me, it's about ownership. So ownership of not just data, but process. So you contextualize data through a process. And that way you can align ownership both at an end-to-end, because often it goes across the business, and also the what I call sub-process components. You also then understand the critical data. So then you define it, map it into a conceptual model. But the point of having the ownership is then we're using what we call the first, second, third line of defense. So the owners have got controls, so every year they've got to basically review their process, make sure their data's fit for purpose, make sure their process is fit for purpose. And it becomes a part of the way you do business, as opposed to mapping a process once and it sits on a shelf. So it's all about, I see a CDO as a conduit for change, and that change is primarily driven through that first part of ownership. The technology all supports it, but ownership is critical. And we've got a model where we call it shared ownership. So we have someone who's accountable, we have someone who's responsible, but we say you can be accountable on a reasonable basis. We can be accountable on a 100% committed basis, and they mean two very different things. So if you're accountable on a reasonable basis, it means you've probably got an end-to-end process. There's lots of other people involved who are responsible on a 100% committed basis. And that means that they're doing their job and they know everything about that process. And so it's really about bringing everyone together, understanding what it looks like, and then driving consistency in terms of the way you map, process in terms of the way you define your data, and then you keep it running, because it's going to change, but you make sure you've got owners there in place who are going to look after it and curate it for you.
Just let's have a show of hands. How many people have got somebody called data stewards in their organization at the moment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 10. What's your view on data stewards?
I hate data stewards. I hate the term data stewards, okay? So we've got a model. So we have consumers of data, we have producers of data, we have a custodian, which is technology, we have governance of data, and we have owners of data. So those are the 5 roles in the organization that people recognize, because a data steward seems to suggest that one person is responsible for data. The organization is responsible for data. Everyone needs to understand it. So by looking at doing it through process, you therefore say, well, actually, I'm a consumer and a producer, and you may also be an owner of data. You can have several of those roles, but a data steward to me is a 1970s term, right? We're not in the 1970s anymore, so I think we need to kind of move away from those old-fashioned thinking about data and move forward and start making it so that everyone is responsible, everyone understands what roles they have, and then I think that way it also starts to embed the change.
So, Ryan, it's been fairly well documented recently you're going to start building cars. Maybe not so well known that you've got stores out in China. Tell me a little bit about, how you go from building a strategy to make it operational and then find the right people.
So I think, there was a couple of interesting points that my fellow panelists made. Barry's point about ownership, Johannes' point about levers, I think are critical, because a lot of companies say they want to do data, right? Oh, we need to be data driven. And I think somebody or some team in the organization needs to own that from a strategic perspective, right? Because it's almost a bit unfair to say, look, you need to, from an operations perspective, run your, say, supply chain business. You, from a research perspective, need to run your research business. And on top of that, by the way, you need to come up with this new strategy around data and analytics, custom tailored for your domain. Here's a book on AI. Good luck, right? And I think that's really where it comes down to that ownership and that partnership piece to say, what kind of building blocks do you have in the organization? And once you've centrally kind of defined that kind of overall strategy, with input from different business areas, how do you, on a more of a kind of like local level, right, implement those types of processes, right, build those types of capabilities that really give people a degree of autonomy? It's almost a bit like they talk about in the world of brand marketing, for those of you with a CPG background, like think global, act local, right? You need central media buying power. You need to have a central control over your brand equity. But if you want to activate successfully, if you actually want to move the needle, you need to, devolve power to those authorities. Because the reality is that yes, our team, knows an awful lot about data, because we obviously hire people who know an awful lot about data. But it's not like everybody on our team is an expert at, shipping, or supply chain, or customer loyalty, or running a call center. So figuring out like where we kind of draw the line and how to formulate those partnerships that we can really set people up for success and in many ways make them the heroes, I think is critical, right? Because the reality is that maybe 4 of us, 5 of us, have this love of data, and maybe some of you in the audience as well. Others might just have a morbid curiosity. But the reality is that many in the business don't share that view, right? Yet if you make somebody, shine because, through some forecasting model, they now, save the company a ton of money or made a whole bunch of extra money, or you doubled, the amount of revenue that was earned on a particular product. I mean, hell, people are going to be knocking down your door asking for even more data. And I've seen it happen to, the staunchest, of opponents in my previous life. And I think, in a company like Dyson, that's no different.
It's interesting. Let's just, again, come back to the audience. How many of you find it easy to recruit the staff that you need? Let's have a show of hands. 2. Okay. So one of the interesting things, there's a debate that's going on at the moment a lot in the industry, is around the data industry is new. The CDO functions, I think Deloitte have just issued a survey they have done that around 15% of organizations across Europe currently have a CDO. Now, with all of GDPR, and yes, I'm working for Sainsbury's, helping in their data governance and doing the GDPR, it's challenging at the moment to find people who understand the legislation, understand the technology, and have done it before. So I think that's one interesting. One other question, in terms of departments that you report into, who reports into finance? Who reports into technology? Marketing? Data function as its own? Okay, so there's a real spread of which department do you report to. And interesting, Peter Jackson, who I think everybody knows, may have just launched a book today. He joined Southern Water and was chatting last week. So he started off working originally for the strategy. He then went to work for marketing, and now he works for the CEO in his own function as a CDO, because they couldn't place him. They didn't understand this thing of data. But I think a lot of thing about data is about people, and it's actually about asking the right questions. Because how many companies, so I helped do the transformation at British Gas. In total, we had 50,000 reports that we produced on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So that was 1,200 reports. By the time we finished, by just turning off reports, we got down to 300. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, Nick from Kyrus, who are a company who specialises in this kind of stuff, turned around and we asked the question. So we were saying earlier, having a BA who's skilled, asking the right question. So if you ask somebody, I need to enable me to, and then ask the finalist, so what are you going to do with it? What happens with that is we've managed to halve across our client base typically the number of reports that we've got. It's not about the data, it's about the technology. It's often about asking the right question. So I'm going to ask these guys one question each, which says, I'm presuming we're all Chatham House rules here. What's the one secret that, assuming that there's no press in the room, but if there is, what's the one secret that you'd share?
I love how you're looking at me for this. Hands up if you're press.
Is there any press in the room? Okay, this is off record.
No, just attribute it to Barry. I mean, I'd say that most of us have no idea what we're doing, right? Like, this field is so new that companies are just figuring out how to best approach these matters, right? And part of that is, like I said, the fact that we don't really have a lot of kind of reference models to draw upon, or many examples. I mean, Barry's got all of one job previously, that he can draw upon. But it's every day it's a case of kind of figuring out what's best. A lot of kind of like checking in with your peers as well. And look, the reality is the technology landscape isn't really helping. I mean, hands up any of you who attended the Google talk earlier. Okay, a bunch of you. So yeah, Greg's a great speaker, right? And then he mentioned the fact that Google, they're putting all their engineers through ML training, right? Because machine learning is so important. I took that ML training at Google. Now I can tell you that, like, yeah, I can just about get like the demo model running in TensorFlow, but if you ask me to do anything that makes money for a company, I'd fail, right? And I'm a Python programmer who took Google's internal ML training, right? So the next time you've got some, director who's like, oh yeah, no, totally, we should do ML, let's just grab these 3 people from the department and, we'll give them a week to figure it out. Realize what you're asking, right? It's an order of magnitude more difficult than you think. And part of, I think, our jobs is communicating that and evangelizing that, because otherwise what's going to happen is that people are either going to burn out or they're going to quit. And also, they're not going to have a lot of fun doing it, right? And I think we're incredibly privileged that we're working on things that are just genuinely interesting, right? Not only do they make a lot of money for companies, but it's cool. I mean, if you're into this kind of thing. So, let's keep up that kind of spirit and just appreciate what it is we're asking of our people.
Go next.
So for me, it's all about collaboration. So I've got a saying, collaboration is the new black. Because as a CDO, the thing I really like about being a CDO is that we talk to each other, we share our experiences, we all know that we've got some value to add, and that value is added through communication, through sharing, and that for me is the key thing. You've got to collaborate. Business models are changing, we've got to change with them.
Jigsaws?
Jigsaws. So for me, the data team is a business within a business. It has every function that you need. You have to understand procurement and HR, and you have to be rattling those areas as well to get what you need, as well as putting your technology in, developing your teams and doing your culture change as well. That's a whole array of skill. So every project that you run, whether it's dealing with HR or whether it's putting a new technology on a platform, all of those things to me are jigsaws, and they have to seamlessly interlink to enable you to get to your end goal, provide your picture.
And finally?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I don't use the word data. Is my top tip. So it was going to be something else, but I've thought about it now. And actually, so the way that we've approached it at Camden is I try not to. Everybody wants to call it a data program and a data strategy, and I just try to stop that. We want to achieve some really important outcomes by joining up the way we deliver services across silos, and data is going to help us do that. So don't call it data, call it something else, and show the business outcome you're trying to achieve. And that's the way I would recommend you structure a program around it.
And I guess my thing I'm passionate about is about nurturing the talent for the future. I'm not sure the average age on here, but if you look at the graduates and look at the postgraduates, reaching out to finding the programs that are going to find us, the data scientists, the machine learners, the AI, who are the data architects. I think, one person can turn around and say they can find great people. We've got to give back to the industry the ability for placements for students to do this stuff so that we can nurture that future. I think I got a 10-minute sign a couple of minutes ago. I'm just going to hold it open. Who would like to ask a question from this illustrious panel? There's one there. You went first, sir, so let me hand it to you.
Thanks very much. I'm Tim Carmichael. Until recently, I was the Chief Data Officer for the British Army, and now I'm working with Peter Jackson in Southern Water doing their data transformation. This isn't a question, it's a challenge. And the first challenge is I absolutely disagree. We must call it data. Otherwise, you'll never educate people around you who don't want to imagine what data can do. You're quite right to say, focus on the business outcomes, the value that it adds. But if you don't call it what it is, you'll have some people who continue to be willfully myopic over data. My first challenge. My second challenge, Ryan. I think you're doing yourself a disservice, my friend. I think the very tongue-in-cheek version of we don't know what we're talking about, I disagree. You fundamentally have the joke here, and you know what you're talking about. So do all of your fellow panelists. So do those CDOs represented here in the room. The challenge is to share our experiences. So I would say, do not denigrate the position and the responsibility and the experience you hold, because it is so valuable for your business. And just because you might have a bit of self-doubt, don't sweat that. Everyone does.
Yeah, I'd say, Tim, to that point, I think my point was, it's a bit like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where they say that the more you know, the more you don't know. And the reality is that in this situation we're in the industry, there's so much technological change that many conversations I have with companies who are looking to do more with data, people tell me, oh, well, we don't have certainty, or we haven't yet figured it out. So, I think, having that understanding that you don't need, I agree, like you don't need to have all the details completely figured out. You don't need to know how deep the rabbit hole goes to add value and to kind of have that confidence to deliver value for the business. But at the same time, realizing that this is a very nascent organization. I think, in a previous panel, the remark was made, every time, CDOs meet, the first 5 minutes is spent arguing about the definition of a data scientist. Now, I tell you, if you go into a hospital, you won't have that when you're talking about a cardiologist, or if you go to, Shell and BP and you talk about petroleum engineering. You have that in our world precisely because there is that uncertainty. But I do agree, don't mistake that lack of certainty for a lack of value. So I will totally concede that point. A worthy adversary, sir. And it's part of the book as well. Buy the book.
Hello. Hi. Hi there. I'm Dan Summers. We're Warwick Analytics. We're a tech provider to big companies. What we've noticed is that, and this is a very provocative point, so again, probably Chatham House rules. The higher up you go in an organization, the less leaders seem to know about data because of their age, because of their background. Apart from in a tech company, very few people from technology end up running them for obvious reasons. So how do you square that? Because to me, life's like a Dilbert cartoon where you really have to sort of have baby language or even con your CEOs just to get what's good for them. And I'm just wondering how you deal with this and when is it all going to change?
So you start by not calling it data. for actually precisely the reason you've described. So it is, and a bit like money, it's important that people have stewardship or ownership about money in an organization, and data is exactly the same. But you have to reverse mentor most organizations because of exactly the challenges you've described. So that is my view on your challenge.
Just want to add that everyone focuses on the technology, and technology is always my last consideration. So the cultural change and understanding the organization and how the business works is the first thing you should tackle. And they get that stuff. So kind of almost to your point as well.
For me, it's they're not stupid people at the top of the office. They're very, very bright. They're exceptionally astute. They're just not in our discipline. So it's a case of it's our responsibility to tell that story and have a narrative that hits that mark at that level. And that's the skill in that level.
Okay, who's next? Yeah.
Hi, this question regarding the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers to the bank official. When is it ethical for an individual to breach their duty of confidentiality in order to achieve a higher purpose?
That's an interesting question. So when's it the right thing to be a whistleblower in essence? I think one of the interesting ones that...
So I think I think one of the things we need to do as a data industry is think about ethics. So one of the things we're thinking about doing at the moment is we've got a group data management board that talks about data. But part of what we're looking at doing next is saying we need to come up with some rules around ethics, because legally we can do a whole lot of stuff, but should we be doing it? And I think as an industry we need to be thinking about those rules. So it's almost for CDOs to start getting around the table and saying, I know we can do some stuff, but what are the things we think we should be doing with our data? And it's not really answering directly the question, but I think that's what we have to do, because it's not a simple answer.
So as a regulator?
So to me, there's a value in the whistleblowing because it challenges the organizations with which then they have to answer that. And that's the data challenge that the organizations have to face. There's a certain amount now of information hits and stories hitting the press where it is the effect of poor data that's caused the problem in the first place. You might know that or you might not know that when you see that coming through. Certainly we see that from government departments when things are hitting the press. It's often an issue with data management or data quality. So the challenge that puts back on the organisation is again an opportunity. So it's not our fault in the first place necessarily, but it's an opportunity for change in the future. So not that I'd want it to be happening all the time, but there's a certain value in that.
Okay, I'm afraid we now are time up. I think if we could ask the speakers if you could go in that corner if anybody wants to continue to ask any questions, but thank you all very much.